It's time to work on the cute flower pots. These are blocks 2 and 3 on row 4 of the Spring Showers quilt. The flower pots are on page 57 and page 59. These two blocks will be joined together to make one larger block, so the materials are the same. The background fabric has fusible interfacing on the back, and the material for the leaves also are fused with interfacing. I have the batting, and then from the embellishment packet, I'm using some cork. At the end of the quilt, I will be making some 3D flowers out of felt. I'm also going to be doing the filler block, and this piece is material that is backed with interfacing and will have background quilting. Let's get started. I have opened Embrilliance, and I have decided to merge the two flower pot blocks into one hooping. I will work on Flower Pots 1, which is the larger block with the two flower pots. You can go to Merge Stitch File on the top right of the toolbar to find your files. Another way is to open a folder where you have your file saved. I have a file called Kimberbell Spring Showers saved onto my desktop with all the files, and I will open the quilting bundle. I will be using Plant 1, and I will find the 6x8 horizontal design. I will drag it in to the hoop. Then I will go back to the Embroidery Files folder and drag and drop the design with the two flower pots. I need to make changes to the position of the flower pots, and the first thing I'm going to do is select both designs and come to the rotate icon and choose rotate left so that it's in the correct orientation and it will be easier for me to move. This is also the way that the block will be in the hoop when I stitch it out, so I need to change the size of my hoop. Right now I have the 7x12 hoop. I will go up to the Preferences folder, select 9x14, and change the hoop size. The instructions say that the bottom of the flower pots need to be 1/4 of an inch from this outer border, which means they need to line up with the inside orange border. I will select the flower pots, and using the arrow on my keyboard, I will move them down until they are right at that inside orange border. And the reason is they don't want the flower pots to look like they're floating in the block. The second adjustment I need to make to the flower pots is to move them to the right. The instructions say that the edge of the flower pot needs to be 1/2 of an inch away from the outside orange border. There are two ways that this can be done. The first would be to just estimate that distance. We know that the distance between the two orange lines are 1/4 of an inch. So I would want to move the flower pot to be about that same distance from the inside orange border. So I would select the flower pots and use the arrow key to move the pots over. And I can estimate that this is about the same distance as between the orange lines. The next way is much more precise. There's a few changes that I need to make to the grid. So I will first come up to the Preferences folder, and on the left hand side I will select Grid Settings. Over on the right, it is now set to 1, which means that my grid markings are 1 inch apart. I'm going to change that to 0.25, which is 1/4 of an inch, and this will give me smaller lines on my grid. Now I will be able to line it up much more precisely. The first thing I want to do is to zoom in so I can see it a little bit better. The easiest way to do that is to select the background quilting, come to the compass, and select the S, which means selection, so it will zoom on to the selection. Now you can see that the orange and the inside orange line are lined up right at that 1/4 inch. So the next marking over this line is where the flower pot needs to be. So I wasn't quite close enough, so I will select the flower pots and move over a couple of notches until I'm aligned right with that line. Now I know that the flower pot is 1/4 of an inch from the inside orange line and 1/4 of an inch from the outside, which makes it 1/2 of an inch. I've also noticed that when I zoomed in, I can tell that the pots weren't quite low enough when I moved them down. So I'm going to select them again and just nudge them down so they're closer to the bottom inside orange line. Now this block has done all the adjustments and it's ready to be stitched. Now I will zoom out, so I will select the compass and select H. And now I want to go back to my 1-inch markings. I don't need the 1/4 inch markings for the next flower pot. And it's a little distracting with all those lines. So I will go up to the Preferences folder, back to the grid settings, and change these back to 1. I'll select both designs and move them off the hoop so I can bring in the next flower pot. Again, you can go to Merge Stitch File to find your file. I'm going to go back to the folder and I'm going to bring in the quilting first. So I will go back to the Quilting Bundle folder, go to Plant 1, and on this file I need to find the 4x6 vertical. So here's 4x6 vertical, and I will drag it in to the hoop. Now I can go back to the Embroidery Files folder and select the design with 1 flower pot and drag it into the hoop. Now this just needs one adjustment. The flower pot is fine and centered between the left and right of the block, but it's too far down. So I need to select the flower pot, and the instructions say it needs to be 1/4 of an inch from the outside orange line, which means that it needs to line up with the inside orange line. And that's all that needs to be done for this block as far as aligning. Now I can start the color sorting process. The first thing that I'm going to do is to remove these placement lines that are on the flower pot blocks. So I will find the block with the flower pot. Here's the 2. The last step is that placement line. It will not be stitched out. It could easily be skipped right on the machine, but I'm going to go ahead and delete it since I'm in software. So I've selected it. I will hit delete on my keyboard. I will go down to the single flower pot, the very last step, that placement line, select it, and hit delete on my keyboard. Now I want to bring both blocks into the hoop. I'm going to select this first smaller block and drag it to the very bottom left of the hoop. Now to select the larger block, I'm going to select them on the right hand side. I will select the first, background quilting, hold down my shift key and select the flower pots. Then I will move this block to the very top of the hoop. I want as much space as possible between the 2 blocks. The fabric for the background will overlap slightly, and I want to make sure that it doesn't get caught in the stitching of the other block. I will start the color sorting process with the background quilting. So I need to select the flower pots. I will hold my Command key down to select the second one, and I am going to then hit Command C on my Mac, which will copy these. I will open a new page at the top left, and I will Command V, which is paste. Now it's important that I don't move these because they will be lined up with the background quilting when we move them back. Once I color sort the background quilting, those blocks will not be able to be moved independently. So let's go back to the original page. I'm going to hit delete so I can delete those off this page. So all I have is the background quilting designs. Before I color sort, I want to delete a few steps. I'm going to expand these files, and I normally bypass step 2 and step 3 when I do background quilting. Step 2 is the tack down of the batting. Normally you would cut the batting a little bit larger and you would place that down, run this tack down stitch, and then trim the batting close to that stitch line. I cut my batting exactly to this size, so I don't need to tack it down. So I will just delete this second step. I will select it and hit delete on my keyboard. I will do that for both background quilting designs. The third step, which is now the second step, is the placement for the fabric. Again, it's just 1/4 of an inch outside of the batting line, and Kimberbell gives cutting directions for a much larger piece of fabric. So as long as I can just basically center my fabric over the batting, this is a stitch that I don't need to run. So I am going to select this default blue. It's now number 2 because I just deleted the previous step. So I will select that and hit delete on my keyboard and do the same thing for the second block. So now for each of these blocks, I have the placement for the batting, the tack down for the fabric, and then the background quilting. Now if I were not to color sort and just send this to my machine, it would stitch out one block completely at a time. But that's not how I want to do it. In order to save time and steps and color changes, I will color sort. I will select Utility and Color Sort. And it's been changed by 3 colors. Always select a new view to make sure that the changes are what you are needing. Now you can see that these 2 blocks have been merged into one design. Let's check the stitch simulator to make sure it's exactly what we want. We will start with the placement of the batting, and it will do both blocks, then the tack down of the fabric, and then the background. And that's exactly what we want. We want those steps combined. Now it's time to bring back our flower blocks so we can finish these blocks up. Now I need to go back to the page with the flower pots. I will select both designs and copy. I will use Command C on my Mac. I will go back to the page that has the color sorted background. Make sure it has on the right hand side just one design, and then I will Command V to paste. And you'll notice that since we didn't move the flower pots when we pasted them onto their own page, that they are exactly where we need them to be. They are lined up with the bottom of the block and the right hand side of the block like the instructions want. Now I need to color sort the flower pots. The first step is the stems of the 2 flower pots, and it has the default sage color. If I go down to the next flower pot, the first step is the stem, and it is also the default sage. So I don't need to make any changes for those to color sort and be stitched together. The next step is the placement line for the cork for the flower pots. And you can see that it has a default blue. If we go up to the quilting, we have used the default blue in the quilting background, so this is a color that will need to be changed. I will select the swatch blue, and I will choose the color Grotto Blue, which is just the bottom first color that I have, and select OK. Then the next step after that is the tack down of the pots. We've used the default orange up in the quilting, so I will need to change those as well. I will select Mars and select OK. Now I need to do the same changes to the single flower pot. I will scroll down select the first default blue, which is the placement line, and change it to Grotto Blue. Then to the tack down line and change it to Mars. Now both of these steps for both the flower pots have the same color, and they will be color sorted and run together when I stitch the block. The next step is the placement for the leaves on the left pot. Then it would be the tack down. The next step after that is the placement for the leaves of the right pot, and then the tack down. Although these are not overlapping and the fabric could be placed at the same time, it's pretty close together, and so I think that's why Kimberbell made those two steps at different times. So I'm going to keep them separated. I will select the first placement for the left pot. I do need to change the color because it's the default blue that we've used in the quilting. So I will select the next blue color, which is Robin's Egg. We don't want the Grotto Blue because I used that for the pots. So I will select OK. Then it would be the tack down of those leaves. I will select the orange. We've used Mars, so I'm going to go to Grapefruit, and I will hit OK. Now the pot on the bottom can be stitched at the same time as this left pot, so I'm going to scroll down, and the placement for these leaves I need to change to the Robin's Egg blue, and then the tack down I need to change to Grapefruit. So the leaves on the bottom pot and the top left will be done at the same time. Now while it would probably be okay to stitch and place these leaves on the right, as I mentioned before, there's not a whole lot of room, so the fabric will overlap, and I don't want that fabric caught in the stitching, so I'm going to do those separate. I will scroll back up to the first pot block. The placement for these leaves I need to change because they're the default blue. I've used Grotto and Robin's Egg, so I will go to the next one, which is Anchor. Then the tack down. I have used Mars and Grapefruit, so I will choose Tomato. The next step is the decorative outline for the pots. This color is default Camel, and it's not been used before, so I do not have to change it. The next block also has the default Camel, so those will color sort together. The last steps are the decorative outlines for the leaves. This is default Sage, and if you remember, we used the default Sage when the stems were stitched, so this color does need to be changed. I will pick the next one up, which is Air Force Gray. The next step is the decorative outline for the right pot. I will be using the same color, and I can stitch these at the same time. So I will change this also to Air Force Gray, and then scroll to the bottom for the leaves and change to Air Force Gray. So now all the leaves, the decorative outline will stitch together. Time to color sort and see if the changes we made are what we want. I will go to Utility, Color Sort, and it shows it's been changed by 7 colors or 7 steps. Always select New View. This new view, now you can see, is just one design with a bunch of steps. So let's go to the Stitch Simulator to see if it did what we wanted. It will start with the placement of the batting for both blocks, then the tack down of the fabric for both blocks, and then the quilting. Then it starts on the stems of the 2 pots and then the 3rd pot, which is exactly what we want. It will be next the placement of the pots and the tack down of the pots. then the placement of the leaves on the left and the bottom, and then the tack down of the leaves on the left and the bottom, then the leaves on the right pot and the tack down. Then it will do the satin outline for all 3 pots. And then finally the decorative stitching around the leaves for all 3 pots. So that's just what we want. It will save so many steps and color changes and save lots of times when we stitch this block out. The last thing I'm going to do is to put a block into this extra space. There is one filler block in the quilt. It's small. It has a background quilting size of 2 by 4, and so I think it will fit perfect and will help save on stabilizer. I'm going to open my files and go back to the quilting bundle folder. I will be using the geometric 3, and I need the 2 by 4 vertical. I will move it down and to the right. I thought about adding a design or some words to this block, but decided to go ahead and just leave it with just the background quilting. However, if you would like to add something to this block, keep in mind that the block will be stitched in the quilt in this direction. So you would need to make sure to put your design or words in this orientation. Now, I originally thought about adding this and color sorting with the background fabrics of the 2 flower pots, but I'm not sure what color I will be using for the stitching in the background quilting, so I didn't want them to merge together so that I would have to manually stop the machine in order to change the thread. So I decided to do this block completely separate after the 2 flower pot blocks are stitched. The only other thing that I'm going to change with this filler block is to delete some of the quilting steps. I will delete the tack down of the batting and the placement of the fabric. I will select those and delete. Now I will go to File, Save Stitch File As. I will name the design, save it in my Combined Files folder, and add it to my USB so I can take it to my machine. I will select Embroidery and then USB, and then my Combined Files folder. I will find the flower pot design and hit Set. Then I will change my hoop size to 9 by 14 and select Embroidery.